So we are here in Enon Valley, just a couple miles outside of East Palestine, over in Pennsylvania. I'm here with Hillary Flint. This is our first time meeting, so first off, thank you so much for taking the time. I've seen Hillary's name pop up all over the place. She's very involved with the Unity Council and is just one of many folks that we've been speaking to on our fourth reporting trip here back to the East Palestine area since the derailment and detonation of 5 cars of vinyl chloride back in February. So first off, I guess, would love to learn more about your personal situation with all of this. You know, how did you first hear about this, and you know, how has this affected you and your home here, a couple miles outside from where this happened?
Sure. So I live in Enon Valley, Pennsylvania, which is a part of Darlington Township. So I'm less than 5 miles from where the train derailed. And the night that it happened, I remember hearing a lot of sirens. And that's not typical. This town, we have under 300 people in my town. So, you know, when you're hearing a lot of sirens, you know something's going on. We turned on the news, didn't see anything. So then I pulled up Facebook. And that's when I saw some of the first images of the train derailed. So I know a lot of people that live in East Palestine. Obviously, it's right down the road. So a lot of the people that I know were affected, but I didn't know then that I would be affected. So there was a couple of days that went by, and we knew that there were chemicals, and we're slowly figuring things out. And that's when I started to worry. So I'm a cancer survivor. And when I heard some of the chemicals that were leaking, such as vinyl chloride, you know, I knew there was going to be an issue. So I remember the day of the open burn. That morning, I had my to-go bag ready. I'm a little bit of a prepper. So I had my to-go bag. I was ready to leave. My grandmother took a little convincing, but they'd actually, so I live on family land, to put it in perspective. My family moved here from Italy. I live in the house my great-grandmother built. And we had a farm, a tomato farm, you know, of course, the typical kind of Italian story. So we're 4th generation on my land, and my father built a home right behind us, and that's where my younger siblings were being raised. And I definitely knew that there was cause for concern when my little brother's school district was evacuated. They had early dismissal is what they called it, and I think that was sometime around 11 a.m. And I remember thinking, you know, oh, like, that's even further. Like, the school district is way further than our home. So I just thought, oh, we're evacuating the school to get kids with their families, and then the rest of us will be evacuated.
Right.
Well, that didn't happen. So my entire family did decide to self-evacuate. We stayed at hotels. My brother and my parents stayed a little closer to his hockey game that night, and then my grandmother and I stayed in a little bit further into Beaver County. And you know, they on the news are telling us, okay, it's safe to go home. So I'm thinking, you know, oh, okay, we'll just go home the next day. I had to fly out for work, so I had to get my bags and stuff anyway. And when we opened the door to our sunroom, that's when I knew that there was a huge problem. The smell was like a sweet bleach. And when I initially said that, it didn't make sense to me. And now, you know, I'm talking to all these different scientists and stuff, and they're saying, yeah, that's exactly it. But it just smelled like a chemical smell, but a little bit sweeter. And we didn't know how long it was going to last. We didn't know what to do. So we started, you know, making phone calls. There was a Norfolk Southern Assistance Center number at that time. We called the DEP. A lot of my neighbors were doing the same thing here in Enon. And we were all just told, oh, it couldn't affect you.
Right.
Like, it's just a coincidence. You know, months later now, I'm hearing a lot of my neighbors having the same exact story. So I'm like, okay, that's a crazy coincidence.
Right.
But we couldn't get answers. Right. So we had to figure it out for ourselves.
Right.
And I eventually thought that things would change. I thought, you know, someone would finally tell us what to do, or someone would, I don't want to say come to our rescue, but give us some guidance. And months in, that just didn't happen.
Right. And to be clear for folks too, so the what they were initially calling controlled burn, but we now know wasn't controlled and really didn't likely need to happen based on what we learned at the NTSB hearing back in June. That's where the actual owners of the vinyl chloride, the company that produced it, you know, went on the record saying that they told Norfolk Southern that they did not think that they needed to detonate these cars. There were other ways to clean this up that would have prevented this from affecting further away communities such as this. But that cloud during the controlled burn that many of you have seen, the giant plume of chemical toxic smoke, blew in many cases right over this community.
Yeah, so Pennsylvania was hit harder by the plume than Ohio. And there are plenty of different plume maps that all prove that. I have a lot of neighbors who have pictures of it just, enveloping their farms. Even we were very late to self-evacuate, and I remember driving through Chippewa, which is, even further away, and seeing the plume in my rearview mirror and thinking like, oh my goodness, like, that was a moment I thought, do we ever get to go home? That looks crazy. And yeah, there's people with photos of it at their farm, and still a Pennsylvania representative that represents a lot of the local communities said, just because you saw a black cloud go over your house doesn't mean that you've been affected. And that's the moment I realized it's not our local government's probably not going to be the one to help us, because they just don't even understand the depth of what happened. And not only did my house, continue to smell like that, that smell traveled with me. So I had mentioned I was going on a work trip right after. So I packed my bag and I was flying out to California, got off the plane, your normal pleasantries with your boss, a hug, oh, good to see you. And he goes, why do you smell like that? And at that point I was like, oh my goodness, like, did this come with me? And so when I finally opened up my suitcase, I was like, oh my God, it did.
Right, you packed your clothes.
And it still does. So 6 months later, I ended up getting a rental home, and I packed all my clothes and things like that, and I was just gonna take that up to the house first. And as soon as I unzipped the bag, there was the smell. And that was the moment I realized, I'm not just moving, I'm starting over. Because I've washed all those clothes many times. So how do you get that smell out? You don't.
Excuse me. To be clear as well, Norfolk Southern is not reimbursing anything for really anybody on the Pennsylvania side of things, from what I understand. Is that correct? Have you tried to reach out to them? Will they do anything?
Yeah, I've gone in plenty of circles with Norfolk Southern and different levels of Pennsylvania government. So initially, I had this smell, so I knew that I needed to get some testing. So that was my first kind of ask, is how do I get testing for my home? And that didn't exist for where I lived. And I was lucky enough to find a university. Wayne State University came out, and they did a lot of testing in PA. And they were one of the only universities who even considered us, which I really appreciate. But they came out, they did some testing, and they found vinyl chloride in the fire pit outside of my home. They had taken a sample of charcoal, because charcoal holds on to vinyl chloride, because it only has like a short half-life. So that was the only place they could have really found to prove that vinyl chloride was there. And then inside my home, I had an air purifier. And it looked crazy after the derailment. Like, I just had never seen so much dust on it. And overnight, it was caked in dust. So I'd said to them, like, here, like, will you be able to find anything on this? So they took the filter, and there they found ethyl hexoacrylate, which is likely the smell. So that air purifier filter was right next to my bed. And now that I have this proof, I think, okay, now I can maybe get some assistance. And I didn't. And I still to this day haven't. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro was in Darlington Township for a small business resource fair. And, I'm always like, what about the people? What about the residents? Not all of us have a business, but we're still affected. So I went down there and I tried to talk to him. And he handed me this form, and it said small business loss claim sheet. And he said, here's how Pennsylvanians are getting help and getting financial assistance. And he said, yes, hundreds of Pennsylvanians are getting help through this. Like, yeah, you'll qualify. So I thought, okay, like, I was like, I even said to him, like, this doesn't look like it would help me. This isn't intuitive. He was like, just do it. Like, just, email that person. And so I did. And of course, it didn't work.
You're not a small business.
Yeah, it was some type of attorney from Norfolk Southern who was doing a lot of the small business claims. And so he referred me to the assistance center. And he had said to me, and first of all, when you call the assistance center, they ask for your address multiple times. So you're giving your address to all these different people, which I think is super weird. But I remember him saying, like, oh yeah, you don't qualify based on our map. And I said, okay, are there any Pennsylvanians that qualify? He goes, yeah, like, there's people in your community that qualify, just not your house. And I'd asked, how many households from Pennsylvania? And he said 8. So out of the thousands of people that live, my community's small, but we're part of Darlington Township, which is a couple thousand. There's South Beaver, which is probably another couple thousand. So out of all of that, 8 Pennsylvanian families.
I mean, and frankly, I'm trying to do the math in my head. I think I've spoken to 8 Pennsylvania families who really should have qualified for assistance. Obviously the state of Pennsylvania has more resources than I do to go talk to these people and find out that more than 8 people need the resources. I mean, 8 homes, correct me if I'm wrong, that might be like a couple homes that are on Taggart Street on the Pennsylvania side, and that's probably it.
Yeah, it's probably some homes just down this road, which is right before Taggart.
Okay.
So that seemed crazy. And so my next question was, how do we get that map expanded? And that was another rabbit hole that I went down that, one person would say it's the federal EPA, then it was Ohio EPA, then it was the Pennsylvania DEP, then it was PA EMS, and I still don't have a solid answer on who actually can do that.
Right.
And
when you ask any of them, they probably say, oh no, reach out to this
point.
person, reach out to this person, reach out to this person. And that's something that's true for folks in Pennsylvania, but even true for a lot of folks in East Palestine directly. I spoke with Shelby Walker yesterday. Her home is 900 feet from the derailment site. The construction cleanup is literally in her backyard.
Yep.
There were train cars leaning against her property fence. She, to this day, can't get the EPA to do a soil test in her backyard.
No, they will not. And so I had a meeting with Mark Durno and Jamie Wallace of Unity Council. And he even said to me, your results in PA were the first ones that made me go,
Right.
we should look into PA more. And he's, telling me all these things, and then nothing comes of it.
Right.
And he won't admit that, publicly, but what they say to you one-on-one always seems to be very different than what they say to the masses,
Right.
which has been a continued issue. But my point is, all you have to do is come out and smell my house.
Right.
Like, just come smell it. And then you can make a decision on what to do. But instead, they will. So I guess someone had brought up my test results to the EPA, and they said, oh, it's because of the ethyl hexyl acrylate is from her doing laundry in her home.
Right.
Now, here's the best part. I don't have laundry in my house. And they wouldn't know that because
Right.
they've never been to my house.
Right.
Because they won't. I think recently we've been seeing some success in getting the EPA to come out to people's homes. I haven't given a call yet. At this point, I'm just exhausted with
Right.
it. But, how do you make these broad assumptions without going into someone's house or even driving by someone's house?
Absolutely. I'm curious, did you or anyone in your family experience health symptoms when kind of coming back? I know you've kind of been in a mix of staying in the home, staying away from the home, just based on you can't afford to stay away from your home when Norfolk Southern is not reimbursing you for relocation. Did you or anyone in your family experience health symptoms?
Yeah.
And I guess, are you still experiencing any, I would say?
Definitely. So I just got back from Chicago, and immediately I have watery eyes again. I'm very congested, very tired. But initially, the first couple weeks were definitely the worst. It was nonstop diarrhea. It was horrible rashes. And they were happening after I would shower. So initially, I thought that it was the water.
Right.
Now, my water tests were fine. It wasn't until later I found out that it's actually the humidity. So if you had a chemical in your air and it got trapped into a surface, let's say curtains, rugs, what happens when humidity comes in, that off gases. So that's likely why I would be getting these rashes after showers. But I would just, be covered in red, itchy rashes. I would say the congestion was really some of the worst part of it. But a couple months in, myself, my partner, we all had horrible upper respiratory infections, which, of course, it's like, oh, that's bronchitis, or I tested negative for strep and COVID and all these things. So it's just been continued, I would say, symptoms of really bad allergies
Right.
is what I would say sticks with me. But the big one for me personally is I have endometriosis, and it's taken me years to get this disease under control. And what they had to do is put me on all these different hormones to completely stop menstruation. That's what helps it not spread in my body. And so I didn't menstruate in my life for well over 5 years. And since the train derailment, I am menstruating again. So to me, that says, this is very significantly affecting hormones.
Yeah.
And I can't get any answers for it. It's just, up your medicine, go on more, and I shouldn't have to do that. Someone should be remediating my home or relocating my family.
Right.